Hello, my name is Jake Blotter. Um, don't know who else might be watching this, but I've provided a brief tutorial about how to work through Genesis when you're on inpatient. I'll try to keep my voice as entertaining and engaging as possible. It is not the most exciting subject, but you will find while you're an intern on any inpatient rotation that you're pretty much a glorified secretary, and knowing the ins and outs of Genesis will prove to be very useful. So I hope that this will be of benefit to you. So to start out, this might be a screen that you pull up once you're logged into Genesis. I want to point out a couple of things here. It might look a little different from mine. Since I started radiology, a couple things changed. This up here by the smiley face used to say like ED tracking or something like that. Now it says OB tracking. I promise I'm not keeping an eye on the obstetric patients. But when we click here, I'm also able to see the ED. So yours might just say ED. It's a good way to keep track of who might be getting admitted to your team. The red cross is over the recent button. You'll notice that you're only able to have 2 patients open at a time on Genesis. So if you want to go to a patient's chart that you were recently in, I think the past 5 or 6 patients will show up here. The green star is next to this drop-down menu that you'll notice all of these little tabs up here. You might be missing a couple. You can find them in these drop-down menus, and we'll go through some that you might not have up there. Other things, when you first start an inpatient rotation, you should have gotten sign out from the person you're replacing regarding the patients you're inheriting. On Genesis, we group our patients in teams, and these can be found on these different patient lists. So if you hit the patient list button, you'll go to the different lists that you currently have access to. If you're not seeing the list that you need, such as yellow team or general surgery, double check that it has been shared with you. Go to this wrench and it'll come up with a box where it shows all the lists that have been shared with you, and what you do is you basically just click them over to your side of the box, your user account, and that way you'll get access to the lists. If you don't see the correct list, you'll need to find someone who can share it with you. Once you open the patient's chart that you are taking care of, you will see something similar to this. Mine is a little compressed because our computers in radiology, our monitors are a little narrow, so I don't have everything here, but this is my inpatient workflow. You'll want to be in the provider view tab, at least for now, unless you find one later on that works better for you, but this seems to have all the necessary tools to manage your patient. I'll just point out a couple of things on this screen. We already talked about the patient list. Other things you'll see are this results review tab, which will show labs and culture results and vitals. That'll help you present your patient and keep track of how they're doing over the course of a few days. This is how you'll input orders. This is how you'll add notes. One thing I learned, clinical images, if you want to look at how a wound looks like, but they've already dressed it, sometimes the wound care nurse will take a picture and put it here so you can look at clinical images. Make sure you've eaten lunch before, because that can get pretty grody. iView and INO is intake and output. You can keep track of the patient's fluid intake and output. The MAR summary will help you keep track of the medications that they've been taking. And then one thing that comes to be important is this JLV tab. It's a link to an outside website as you can imagine, because Genesis was rolled out here in 2019, patient's chart on Genesis doesn't have everything that has ever happened to the patient. So GLV is where all of their records, at least in the DoD, are kept. And so you can look up old lab results, old notes, old medications, or even current medications. Everything that happens in our system is also put on GLV, so there should be a conglomerate. Let's see what else. This is just your general inpatient workflow. You can type your notes in here. I didn't really like that. I'll go through how I would write a note, I think a little later. This is the website in case you're not able to access it through Genesis. This is how you get to GLV just on a regular browser. It actually is helpful, so make sure you have this handy in case you're not able to access it through Genesis. So you are admitting your first patient, and your senior doesn't have time to go through everything with you because you guys are super busy. They just expect you to admit the patient on your own and get through it. So what do you do? Well, if you're admitting me, first thing that you can do is go to this patient tab at the very top, go to add patient to a patient list, and if you've been granted access to the correct list, it should appear here, and you can just add me or whatever patient to that list. So that way you're able to at least contribute to a little bit of organization, keep track of who's on your team list. Next, something that yellow team likes to do to keep track of their patients, they'll go over here to this severity tab. They'll choose, what stability their patient is. This is for giving good handoff to the night team or to whatever team is coming on, so that they are aware of who they need to be keeping more attention to, paying more attention to during the night or day. You'll put a one-liner here, just as a brief description of the patient, the actions, anything that needs to be done in the next 12 hours before you take over control of the patient again will need to be put here just for good communication. And then situational awareness and planning is just kind of a, let the team know, are there phone numbers to reach the family that aren't anywhere else in the chart, or anything that you think the next team should know about the patient. So next, every patient who gets admitted needs to have a code status, or the nurses will call you incessantly. So you'll scroll down. If you have this tab open, you can find life-sustaining treatment. You'll go to plus. I think you'll just choose the life-sustaining treatment option, and it'll take you to this. You basically just have to click through all the yellow boxes. So on this one, just if they're full code, you click the top one. Well, actually this one is whether they have decision-making capacity, so hopefully the patient does, and you move on to values, goals of care. One of them you have to actually type in something. If they're full code, I usually just say patient is full code, or if they're DNR DNI, I just say patient is DNR DNI. They don't really need a long description. You'll click through these with the correct bubbles filled in, and then don't forget this last one. You need to put in your attending's name as a resident, and then before you exit out, you're not done, you got to click the green check mark, and that will put their code status in. The medrec is not the funnest part of admitting a patient by any means. Patients just have lots of medications. If you're lucky, they have a list. What you'll want to do is make sure that their medication history is updated, and when you do the medrec for like admission or discharge, this box will come up with all of their medications that are currently in our system. If there's a filled in circle for for the play sign, that means that they're currently getting that medication. If there's a orange square, it means that that medication is either stopped or being put on hold. If the circle is filled in by the medication bottle, it means that you're prescribing it. So in this case, I took this from a current patient at David Grant. These are their home medications. Looks like they've been entered incorrectly. It looks like we're doing the discharge medrec because we're stopping. This one means that it's a hospital medication. So we're stopping the hospital one and we're continuing the home medication. So anytime you do the admission medrec, you'll play all of their home medications that you want them to be receiving, and they will end up getting a hospital medication, I guess is what you could say, because they don't bring their home medications. We give them their medications. So when it's time for them to discharge, you'll stop the hospital formulation that we've been giving them and just play their home medication. A little bit confusing. You'll get the hang of it. Sometimes when you enter in medications, it'll come up with like a blue circle with a white X through it, and you'll just have to right click and modify, and it'll want a little more information about that medication. Like, is it PRN? Is it how often do you want to be giving it? Stuff like that. So this will just take some time to get used to, I think. But just know that if the patient shouldn't be getting it, then that circle should be filled in under the orange square, and if they should be getting it under the green triangle, the circle should be filled in. So we'll move on. To actually admit the patient, they need what's called the PSO order. So type in PSO into the order entry, and you can put in really any admission template, an order template, but this is the typical one that we use, the Med General Admission, so you can click that. This is what the PSO patient status order set looks like. So if this doesn't come up, you can just click on it over here. You'll notice that it says planned. Once you initiate it, it'll go to initiated. If the patient needs telemetry, make sure that this box is checked. I believe you'll need to put in parameters for when the telemetry people should call you. So when you click on that, you can modify it and put that in the comments. But more importantly, when you admit the patient up here, you'll need to put in a couple other bits of information. Their level of care, they could be ICU or med-surg. Medical service, if you're on yellow team, it'll be family medicine. You're attending. Request bed assignment, if they're coming from the ED, it's yes. And then under special instructions, you usually put what team, so yellow team. Very important for this part, go to diagnoses, and every patient needs an admitting diagnosis, or else, again, the nurses will call you, beep you, because they want to reach you. Put in that diagnosis, and they will be happy. This is what the Med General Admission order set looks like. You can just go through and pick. Some are already pre-populated. I'll draw your attention to like diet. That's one that they will need. Honestly, you can give diabetics a carb controlled diet, but honestly, are they gonna eat that way at home? Probably not. I ended up just giving people regular diets unless they needed to be NPO. There's a couple other things that, like insulin and VTE prophylaxis. When you click on them, another box will open that you'll need to fill out. We'll go through that. But I really wanted to draw your attention to the orders for labs. I think that they are pre-populated with only having them drawn once, so make sure you change that to every morning or every 8 hours, however often you want to be getting them. This is the insulin order set. Diabetics do not get their oral medications while inpatient. They're put on a sliding scale, so you'll just have to, honestly don't know what criteria to use for the sliding scale, which one to go on, but this is how you find which one to do. And then prophylaxis for DVTs, if you're just going to do the squeezers, or no VTE prophylaxis, or if you're going to give whatever you want to give. Just remember that people with GI bleeds should not be getting DVT prophylaxis because you'll make them bleed. There's also a pain management order set. You will have patients that need different levels of pain control, so this one's the tier 1, starting with PO medications. I guess they're all PO. There's like tier 2 and tier 3 that have IV formulations as well, but it's just for first line, second line, and third line pain control. Sometimes you don't know what order to put in. Maybe you want the nurse to know that they need to call you before the patient eats or something like that. Well, that's what the communication order is for. You'll literally just enter in communication order and tell them what you want them to do. So like reposition every 2 hours is what that one looks like. So that's just a way for you to communicate something to the patient. I like this one, offer iPad. Wonder how often he or she gets the iPad. Anyways. So now you want to write your note. You have all your information. You've interviewed the patient. You've done your extensive physical exam. I have favorited here the admission H&P. You'll write your title. Maybe it's yellow team admission H&P. That's how we usually did our admission notes. If you're just doing a progress note, every patient every day needs a progress note, so you'll do like a provider hospital note or something like that. You can find that under the type. When you're writing your note, we have a couple dot phrases that make life a little easier. Instead of saying the same thing over and over again, you can do, I think there's one for review of systems, you do dot ROS. For labs, you do dot labs or hashtag labs. For, what else is there? Physical exam, you do dot PE. Like, just save yourself some time and fill those out. You can steal some from other people. For example, I have one for discharge instructions that just gives a nice little explanation for why they were admitted. And this goes with the patient to take home so they know what to expect when they get home. So you can search for whoever you want to steal one from me or from whoever, and just add it to your auto text. If you don't see this is the Manage Auto Text tab. As mine's not currently up here in the toolbox, you find it by doing that little down arrow like I showed you earlier. So now you've written your note, you want to send it to your attending so they can sign it. Once you hit sign and submit on the note, it'll bring up this box and you'll choose who you're sending it to right here. You can star it so that you don't have to search for them every time. If you want them to sign it, you click the sign circle, or if you just want them to review it and then sign it, you can hit this. This allows you, if you do the review, it allows them to modify the note before they sign it. If you sign it first, then they have to addend it, I believe. So they might have a preference over what they want you to do. So we'll move on to the day-to-day stuff. Again, if you go to results review, these are the different options you can search for. Lab extended is typically where pathology results are. Microbiology is where you'll find culture results. This will just give you information that you can put in your new note or when you present. This is what iView and INO looks like. It'll give you a nice 24-hour summary, hour by hour as well, of their fluid intake and what they've been getting, so that can help you keep track of fluids. This is what the MAR summary looks like. You can go back and see how often somebody's getting a medication, especially PRN medications. You can see how often they're getting that opioid. It'll usually be down at the bottom with the green medications. I also like it as a way to just check my orders, make sure that I've put in everything correctly, that they're scheduled to get something. Sometimes when we put in orders, like if the patient usually takes it in the morning but they haven't and they really need that medication, when you put in the order, usually the order will not trigger the nurse to give the medication to the patient until the next morning in this case. So you'll have to put, when you put in the order for the medication, first dose, give now. Hopefully that all makes sense when the situation arises where the patient needs to get their blood pressure medications now instead of waiting till the next morning. This is your discharge workflow. So you're winning the game, you're getting those patients out of the hospital. How do we do our discharge workflow? So now we're in the discharge workflow little box. Everything that has an asterisk needs to be completed before the patient can leave. You've already done the code status, so we won't worry about that. You'll do the medrec again, doing the little orange square and green play button, or prescribing medications, you'll put that there. Problem list, if you've put in a diagnosis for their admitting order, that'll populate. This won't go away until you've put in the actual discharge order, and then you'll put in follow-up instructions. You'll put in who they have a follow-up appointment with. I usually just put in like follow up with your PCM, but you actually have to go through and choose who they're going to follow up with. A couple other things that the nurses have bothered me about with this: patient instructions. You need to give them like actual instructions for going home. I'll show you the dot phrase I use for that. And then they also want you to put in some patient education. If you go there, you'll find that you can just search for different educational pamphlets that are on already in Genesis that you can have the patient go home with. So let's move forward. This is the dot phrase I use for patient instructions. It'll once you put in the dot phrase, it'll just come up with your templated little paragraph. It'll have like what new medications they're going to go home with, which ones they're going to stop. Under that part of the paragraph, you can put .medrec, and that'll give you the current status of their medications. It'll show which ones they're starting, which ones they're stopping. So that's another good dot phrase, is .medrec. But you'll just have to go through after you do .dcins and kind of fill in portions of the paragraph. I can remember that one of them says you've been hospitalized for blank, and so you have to put why they were hospitalized. So you'll go through there. You'll also make a note when you go to do your discharge note. There's a discharge summary specific note that will come pre-populated with different things you'll fill in, similar to like the admission note. So just little things to do when you're discharging a patient. This is what the actual discharge order looks like. The order set has to actually discharge the patient, if there's any activity restrictions, what diet they're going home with. It used to have a pharmacy discharge order. I've had to add that recently, so they must have gotten rid of it, but that's what the order looks like. It's nice because it means it's basically telling the pharmacist, hey, I want you to look through their medications, and you can specify in the order that you want that they're going home with 2 new meds, and the pharmacist will come by and make sure the patient knows how to take the medications. As we wind to a close here, just want to talk about a couple other things that you'll find on Genesis. This care team clipboard is nice. Oftentimes you'll go down to admit a patient together with your senior or with another intern, and you'll be doing the interview, and the other intern or your senior can be taking notes on the patient. You'll find that from Genesis account to Genesis account, like you've obviously been writing notes, and those aren't saved on the patient's chart until you've signed them. But the care team clipboard is something that's shared between all users that are currently in that patient's chart. So the person listening to you interview can be putting in notes on this section to make sure that once you get back to your desk, you have everything there that you discussed with the patient. So it's kind of a nice way to help each other out. You might be asked to print the list. I remember that was one of the intern responsibilities for sign out, is printing the list. After you've updated the patient's status, if you remember that screen where we went through the status and different action items for the incoming team to accomplish before you get back on duty. Now you're ready to print the list. You'll go up here to Physician Handoff Work List. You'll select the right list you want. You'll go over here to the checklist thing button, and you'll make sure all the patients are, it'll come up with all your patients currently on that list. You'll make sure everyone's checked. They might want it in a specific order according to room number. You'll just have to make sure that you're following the prior list order, just to not make anyone mad. And then once you do that, an option to print will come up, and you just want to make sure you're mapped to the printer. Let's see if there's anything else. Nope. So that is kind of a brief tutorial about how to manage your patients on Genesis. Again, it's definitely a learning process. I felt like a lot of intern year was just getting used to the workflow of each rotation. The inpatient ones are your body pretty much becomes the shape of your chair because you spend so much time just writing notes and checking labs, and I honestly spent very little time with the patients. You're mostly just responsible for having all the information handy when it's time to round, so knowing a little bit about Genesis will be very helpful for that. If you have any questions for me, you can always reach me. I'm not on social media very much, but if you know me, if you know other people who know me, feel free to reach out. My name's Jake Blotter. Always happy to help. Thanks.